Mr. Harrison, and then Mr. Wright.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I hope you all done your due diligence on these candidates. And again, I sent you an open letter. I sent that to several editors here in the media. I believe that Ms. Hammer should be removed as a candidate here. You all know what happened at the Police Oversight Commission. And you know how she threw away all of pretense of independence by following some memorandum that had no legal binding whatsoever. And you also know that what the Department of Justice had to say about her in their findings letter. And then, of course, we have a situation where now the new Police Oversight Board is having to deal with a case that I brought before Ms. Hammer when she was the IRO, that she apparently produced a fraudulent record on. And now the new POB is having to deal with that. So I really think that she needs to be taken off the list as a candidate for NG. Thank you.
And Ms. White.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. I too am speaking to urge you not to name Robin Hammer, Inspector General. When the DOJ report came out, and I sent you all an email about this, when the DOJ report came out saying that the IRO is more in line with the police officers than the community she was supposed to represent, then President Sanchez asked Ms. Hammer to comment on it, and she said, well, the only case I investigated that's in the report was the shooting of Mickey Owings, and the only thing I had to do was to see if the officers violated policy. And the officer in that case shot Mr. Owings when he was speeding directly at him. That was her statement to the council. The DOJ report found numerous violations of department policy, noted that Mr. Owings was shot through the passenger side window. There is a video on KRQE, which I sent you the link to, that shows the officer who shot Mr. Owings running up to Mr. Owings' vehicle from the side in order to shoot him. We need an Inspector General who will be honest and forthcoming and complete and not dodge. I don't know anything about the other two candidates. I hope you do. Just because you have three candidates in front of you, that doesn't mean you should pick one. This is a very, very important decision. If there are flaws in the other two candidates, please defer and ask for two more names. Thank you.
We want to go ahead and hear from the three candidates now. So if you all three would like to maybe come down and sit on the front row, and then we'll just go in alphabetical order by last name. So starting with Ms. Vicki Duran.
Good morning, good evening, Mr. President and councilors. Would you like me to tell you something about myself and my experience? I know you all have our resume, or did you want to throw out some questions at us?
Why don't you go ahead and start, and we start some questions.
Okay. Let me start out with why I would be the ideal candidate for this position. I'm a 29-year public servant with no personal or professional baggage. I spent a large part of my career working for the city. I am familiar with intense, stressful investigations, and in investigations where the city is waiting for answers, such as the Hollywood video homicides, which I was the lead investigator on. When I left APD and went to the Attorney General's office and then on to other state government work, I furthered my career in management. I have a master's degree in public administration, which will serve me in this organization leading public employees. I have background in financial investigations. I have background in compliance, which I believe that that the Inspector General's office should be able to bring compliance to any organization within the city when it is needed, training as well as the ability to conduct unbiased investigations, which I believe I can do and I have done over my years working for the city and for the state. So I will, I'm open to any questions you might have.
Councilor Sanchez.
I have a question, but I'd like to wait, 'cause I'd like to ask all three candidates the same question.
Okay, we can do it.
Can I add one more thing?
Absolutely.
I've been separated from the city for 15 years now. I have no professional or relationships, no professional or personal relationships that would compromise my ability to do my job. So, which, when in the Government and Accountability Act, it does indicate that we need to be separated for 4 years. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Grasso, I believe is next. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. President, councilors. I think I'll just give you my background, some of the things I've done. Born and raised in Nebraska, went to school there, joined the Air Force, where I spent 30 years as a pilot in various command and staff positions, culminating with 3 years as the Inspector General at Lackland Air Force Base, which is the largest U.S. Air Force training base in the United States. I retired in 2004 and moved to Albuquerque, where I became a defense contractor. I did that for the past 10 years and finally retired as Vice President and Division Manager at Leidos Incorporated. Since then, I've been the Chairman of the Albuquerque Airport Advisory Board, and I'm looking forward to my next challenge. I think I have the background, the desire, and the independence to be a good IQ. And I'll take any questions.
All right, we'll let Ms. Hammer go, and then we'll have you come back up, Mr. Grasso, for at least one question for each of you all. Ms. Hammer.
Thank you, Mr. President, council members. I've dedicated my career of more than 20 years to conducting independent investigations and holding persons accountable before the law. For a large part of my career, I have focused on my work on public accountability for both elected officials and other government workers. While at the District Attorney's Office here in Vermillion County, I was in charge of the Public Corruption Division, where I prosecuted public officials for criminal acts committed on and off duty. As the Senior Investigative Trial Counsel for the New Mexico Judicial Standards Commission, I was in charge of conducting independent investigations against judges statewide. I presented these independent investigations to a commission, and then those investigations were reviewed by the New Mexico Supreme Court. The New Mexico Supreme Court has found that my findings are warranted to the point that in one 12-month period, 9 judges in New Mexico were removed or resigned as a result of my independent investigations. There have been attacks in the past about the quality of my investigations, and I would submit to you there's no greater standard here in the state of New Mexico than having the New Mexico Supreme Court review independent investigations. I would bring all of this experience to the City of Albuquerque's Inspector General position. As you know, most recently, while working at the City of Albuquerque, I was the independent review officer. I inherited an office which was poorly run, produced substandard finding letters and substandard reports, had no community outreach, and was not reviewing officer-involved shootings. During my 3-year tenure, I turned the office around to attend dozens and dozens of community meetings throughout the entire city. I don't believe there's a city council district that I haven't attended a community meeting at. I worked to improve the investigations of the office, to improve the quality of the findings letters, and more importantly, to improve the quality of the reports which that office gave to this body. I recall one council meeting in which Councilor Garduno even commented on the improved quality of the reports from my office. I found, as IRO, I found against officers, which resulted in at least 2 officers losing their positions, and certainly have no problem holding city workers accountable for their work. But what I take most pride in is my ability to build collaboration and work within a system to hold people accountable. Just like when I prosecuted gang members, I investigated very powerful judges and also listened to the complaints of the citizens of Albuquerque against the police, obtaining credible evidence from people who don't want to testify. One of the public speakers today talked about that, the difficulty in obtaining evidence from people who are testifying against their coworkers or friends. I believe that my experience in serious prosecutions, administrative reviews would be directly applicable and invaluable to the city of Albuquerque. I've been criticized by some for my review of officer-involved shootings. In the more than 20 officer-involved shootings I reviewed during my tenure, Justice Department had issue with one shooting. You heard from one speaker today about his criticism of the semantics, and he provided you a video, which was from a grainy video from a Walmart surveillance tape. And I don't know if any of you watched that. But, and I can't say what the Justice Department reviewed when they made their finding, or in their findings letter of that shooting. What I can say is I reviewed the entire administrative record, which they did not have access to. I also reviewed the criminal record. And what I saw was a car driven by an offender driving directly at police officers who were in vehicles behind the defendant or the offender and going forward through a busy parking lot. So people could disagree about my findings in one case. But what I would ask for you would to be look at my entire record of more than 20 years of not worrying about pleasing anyone, not caring the political status or the power of anyone, but of seeking to obtain independent, credible evidence which can be used. There, as some of the speakers have said, the public speakers have said, the independence of the Inspector General is extremely important. Having an Inspector General that can weed out fraud or mishaps, this council can do nothing more important than appointing the appropriate person for that. But also, we need to have an Inspector General who's willing to look at systemic and programmatic problems within the city and use the information. So not why we caught the bad apple, we gotcha, but what can we learn from that and work within city government to make changes so that we learn from the fraud or the misappropriations that we find as Inspector General. I believe my experience of having worked with the city, knowing who the department directors are, having seen every claim brought before the Claims Review Board for the past 3 years, gives me that experience which would allow me to hit the ground running when I take over a position. I'm not seeking the position as Inspector General as a second career or something to do in my retirement or a stepping stone. I want to help the city of Albuquerque become the best city government possible. I live here, my kids live here. I want to say that we have the best city government in the state of New Mexico, if not the United States.
Ms. Evans, I have a few questions for you. So you mentioned you were IRO in 2014 when the DOJ released its findings, and you commented somewhat on that. But one of the portions, I think it is important. have this discussion. And you and I know that you reached out to me. I think you and I would have probably had the same conversation privately. I think it's important to have this conversation now. You know, I think you would have said the same things, and I probably would have asked you the same things. So, a portion of those findings were specifically the DOJ report said that from our review, it appears that the review officer is more closely aligned with the department than with the community that the review officer serves. And it also said that the review officer has failed to find violations of department policy in cases where it is more likely than not that violations clearly occurred. And in at least one case, she has interpreted the department's policies in ways that are contrary to the policies themselves, but favorable to officers. So that's on record in the DOJ's report. And so I get, I know you described this or you answered this in some ways, but given that assessment of your performance as APD's watchdog, what kind of confidence can you give us that you can function independently as the city's watchdog?
Thank you, President Lewis. I think it's very important for everyone to remember that the DOJ review was from a period of January 1, 2010 until December 31st, 2012. I assumed my duties as IRO on or about September 10th of 2012. So about 10 weeks is when I was in office during the DOJ's review. I believe that some of those, the majority of the review of the independent review office was for my predecessor, someone who this council asked to resign, basically. Someone who was less than satisfactory to the council. I would submit that I made decisions based upon the facts in those 10 weeks of the DOJ review. And if any of those findings, which have been disputed by the city, which is a document that was presented by the DOJ at the beginning of litigation. So it's basically an advocacy document saying this is the position of the government, which the city of Albuquerque has officially never accepted as binding on the city. So this advocacy document, more than 3/4 of it was a criticism of my predecessor. During the 10 weeks that I was IRO, I began a process of reviewing the shootings. I began a process of reaching out to the community. Whereas my predecessor, I'm not aware of attending a single community meeting. And I would submit that I stand by the work that I did as IRO. I'm proud of it.
Ms. Amber, most recently you functioned as the interim director of the Citizen Police Oversight Agency. It seemed to be some contentious relationships there, and also you weren't recommended as the permanent director of the CPOA. So again, just one more question. Given that, what kind of confidence can you give us that you could work well with the AGO, this committee that the IG would work for?
I would submit that I have a track record of working with committees. I believe you have a letter from the prior commission of the Police Oversight Commission, prior chairman of the Police Oversight Commission, and my ability to work with the Police Oversight Commission. All committees are made up of individuals, and I would submit that I've worked with the Judicial Standards Commission as well, and I try my best to make sure that there's consensus within a body. I believe that it's very apparent that when the Police Oversight Board was appointed, that they came with the agenda that they needed fresh blood, or new blood, and they made a decision.
Okay, councilors, questions for any of the candidates? Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a question for all three candidates. I believe one of the most important positions that we have here in the city of Albuquerque is the Inspector General. However, I don't believe that the Inspector General has been utilized to its full potential, and I kind of feel that their hands have been tied by the administration. My question is going to be based on the culture, integrity, accountability, and transparency. How do you plan to improve that department? And also at the same time, looking at the number of cases that the Inspector General has inspected over the past several years, there's been very few cases. A lot of these cases by the administration are basically taken out and handled by private investigators and not by the AG's office. How would you turn that around, and how can we look at making sure that more cases are heard and investigated by the IG's office and not outsourced? Mr. Rand, you want to go first in order that you spoke?
Mr. President and councilors, first of all, this position is not a figurehead. It should be an investigative body, and not just one to get cases and take them out. I would take this position because my expertise is in criminal and administrative investigation. That's what I've done for 29 years, as well as management. So, as I indicated to the Accountability and Government Commission, it would be, for me, I would take this division and move it along as a team of transparency, to bring transparency back to the city, to make the city more confident. I stand on my record of my investigations. It's in my resume, and the experience I have and the teams that I have led, from as small as 5 people to as many as 200 in investigative, from, like, as I indicated, things as stressful as homicide investigations to audit, compliance, financial, and things of that nature. That's what I would do. I would recreate a team and take the people that we have, or that you have, and teach them, if they need to, teach them how to investigate, because that's my experience, and teach them how to be unbiased and unchallenged by the people they approach, the positions they hold within the city, because that's what the city needs right now, is the transparency. They need, in listening to the people today, they need somebody that they can trust. And I feel that, it's like that.
Thank you.
Mr. President and Councilor Sanchez, in answer to your question, I think it's a matter of educating the workforce, the entire city government population, on what the IG is and what it does and what it does not do. I think getting the word out is something that, if the general population knew what the IG was there for, they would probably take advantage of it, and you will see an increase in the amount of cases. I think having a good, visible, and engaged IG is part of how you make better government, how it becomes more transparent, how all the attributes that you're referring to include. If the people are confident that if they see something wrong and they report it, that something will happen and there will be no retaliation. It's a matter of education, and if one of the first things I would do was to at least engage with the newcomers, when the newcomer orientation, a presentation by the IG at that point. And then as time permits, maybe reach out into the departments and do department by department kind of education, so people are aware of the IG program and what it is and what those protections are. I'd also take a look at the whistleblower ordinance and the IG ordinance and see if I could better align the two. Right now, as I read it, I think there's things in the whistleblower ordinance that probably should migrate to the IG ordinance to make it more seamless, to create some synergy between the two, and make it more understandable. If somebody's going to complain, if somebody wants to point out inefficiency in the government, and they decide, maybe I better go read those ordinances to see what I'm getting into. I think it's not written in plain enough language that gives them the confidence that they could go ahead and voice their concerns, voice their complaints. So harmonizing and synchronizing those two ordinances a little better, I think, would go a long way of increasing the amount of activity in the IG's office.
Thank you.
President Lewis, Councilor Sanchez. Currently, or in the past, the Inspector General has relied solely upon complaints to the office in order to make investigations. I believe according to their annual report last year, they received 38 tips, if you will. I think it's very important that every city worker know what the Inspector General does, have the ability to make complaints, and know that their complaints are going to be fully investigated. No one wants to disclose that their coworkers are doing something inappropriate if they think it's going nowhere, and they'll be seen as a whistleblower without any protection at all. I think it's important that the Inspector General's office give confidence to city workers that their complaints will be fully investigated impartially by a experienced staff. I have experience working, as I discussed in my first statement, with bodies of people who are testifying against perhaps their supervisor or their coworkers in building that confidence. I think it's important to start from the ground up and go to individual staff meetings of people who are already here. I think through my work with the City of Albuquerque, I have worked with many of the division directors, if not all of them, through the Claims Review Board. And I would build upon that relationship then to go to individual staff meetings. I think another source of information is through the Public Service University program, pre-management program, which is a program developed by the city in which people who are not currently in management positions are given training for a full year. And part of that full year training is that they have to develop an idea to improve their department. So those members of 20 or so city employees who sign on for that and agree to be part of the pre-management program have specific knowledge of where there may be fraud, waste, or abuse in the city. And I think that the Inspector General should be certainly geared toward, as the ordinance states, not just fraud, but the waste and abuse portion of that ordinance would enable it to improve the city. And the members of the pre-management program already are required as part of their program to find waste and abuse. I certainly would use that information to give more ability to the Inspector General.
Thank you, Ms. Hammond. Thank you, Mr. President.
All right, councilors, any other questions for any of the candidates, Inspector General? Okay, so again, this is OC4, the selection of the Inspector General. There are 3 candidates, and the council rules provide the procedure for appointments made by the council. We're following that procedure tonight. The ballots that have been distributed by the staff to the council list the 3 candidates in the same ranked order as submitted by the AGO committee. Councilors are to indicate the order of your preference with a 1 for your first preference, a 2 for your second preference, and a 3 for your third preference. And after councilors complete their ballot, the staff will collect the ballots and tally the results. Councilor Benton, did you have a comment? Councilor Benton?
I have a question for staff. How many applications were received by the AGO committee?
Mr. President, Councilor Ben, I'll defer to the Deborah Oshimura, member of the AGO committee.
I believe, Councilor Ben, President Lewis, I believe the number that we received initially was, I think this go-around was 19, you're taxing my memory. We then limited it down to actually 5 that we wanted to interview. 1 did not attend. We interviewed 4. And we submitted the 3 that we, in the order in which we put down.
I didn't catch that. How many applications did you say?
I believe it was 19. The first go-around, it was around 30. We actually reposted the position. So I believe it was 19. I could be incorrect, but it was right around that.
Thank you, sir.
That help?
Councilor Davis.
Mr. President, if I may, maybe a point of order, and perhaps ask the staff to help us if we can before we submit ballots. It's my understanding that the ordinance may perhaps require us to make some selection during this process. But I have some concerns. I have concerns. I think that our Inspector General's office is a critical part of our city government in providing accountability to people and to this body and to others. It certainly, I think, right now needs a staff and some direction. I think there's a strong committee, our membership and representatives from administration that provide good leadership there. I think the staff, there's opportunity to increase the staffing and resources there to do the work there. But I also have some concerns that our selection of someone really needs to have both the confidence of the public and of this body. And that perhaps that the candidates, the concerns we've heard here tonight demonstrate that there might not be that. And so I'd ask council staff to perhaps weigh in a second on what our options might be if we choose not to make a selection this evening. I would generally say I would like to make a motion in some way to either defer this or move this forward so we can have some additional time to weigh in and understand the process, but perhaps if that's okay, Mr. President.
Yeah, Mr. Zamani, you want to comment on the process?
Mr. President, councilors, the AGO ordinance and the IG ordinance says that the committee will accept applications, interview candidates, and submit 3 candidates to the council, and then the council will select from those 3. But it doesn't say what the timeline is, and it doesn't compel the council to act within any specific timeline. If indeed this evening the council is unsure of how it wants to move forward, a deferral would be in order if that's the council's wishes, and then perhaps we could discuss our options more thoroughly, or maybe even reach out to the AGO and ask them informally, perhaps to provide us additional candidates.
Mr. President and Mr. Zamani, thank you for that. Mr. President, with that, I just feel concerned that the public doesn't have confidence in the list that we have here available for us today, and that doesn't serve the interest of this body, and that when we appoint someone to this position, they're there. We don't have the ability to remove them. That's up to the committee, and that's a long process. And then we certainly need someone that everyone can agree on. I'd like to make a motion that we defer this for at least 30 days to give the council time to explore the options under the ordinance, perhaps more information about the candidates, or to have any other conversation that might be appropriate.
Councilor Bennett?
Also a question for staff. So if we were to do such a deferral, there's nothing that would prevent us generating additional questions for candidates during that time?
Mr. President, Councilor Bennett, absolutely not.
Thank you.
And I question on that. I mean, what would be the most appropriate way for the council to generate those questions? I mean, it would seem that those questions should be generated in a public way, like we have done, and probably maybe even should do some more of in this process. But I also would question a process where this council has individual meetings and with certain candidates or certain candidates that might be trying to get the job. I guess I'm concerned about that in some ways if some time goes by and these questions are posed in a way that aren't public.
Mr. President, councilors, as you know, regarding the ethics issue, council staff right now is trying to schedule a study session for the second week in January, and perhaps we could put that on the agenda, and the council could discuss a series of questions that would ask all 3 candidates. We could develop a series of questions that could ask the candidates.
I think that's a great suggestion. So in a study session, which is a public meeting, anybody's invited to, that the council can construct a certain amount of questions that we specifically give to these 3 candidates. I guess possibly we could discuss that and then have them come back in a formal public way. Okay. Council, there is a deferral motion on the table. I think it needs a second.
I'll second.
It's got a second. There's a motion for deferral and a second. Councilor Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will support the deferral. I do have some concerns, though, regarding the Accountability and Government Oversight Committee. I know that we've had this position vacant now for some time, and I know they've done their due diligence and have worked extremely hard in trying to bring forth these 3 candidates. As the chairman stated, there was 30 candidates that began this process, and I think they said they interviewed 5, but only 4 showed. And this is such an important position. I think we should just take a little more time. We've waited this long to get to this point. to assure that we hire the right person for this job. Because like I stated, this I think is one of the most important jobs in the city of Albuquerque. So I have no problems deferring this for 30 days. I just think the job and the position is too important.
Councilor Benton?
And just you raise an important point, Mr. President. I think that, you know, from a standpoint, I don't know whether our legal staff would like to weigh in on that, but I think it should be made clear, or should be clear to the public and to ourselves, that we're not going to have offline discussions with any candidate, and that any questions that we might want to bring forth, that those go through staff, and that there'd be a very hands-off type approach to how we go forward with this.
Mr. President, Council Ben, don't know that it's so much of a legal question, but it's certainly the most transparent method to move forward. And it certainly gives the public and the council the ability to hear all the same things and respond to the same objective criteria.
So if I could, I don't know whether that needs to be memorialized in this motion or not, but I would like it to be understood unless there's any objection.
Would that be appropriate to make that official in some way, either within this motion or as a statement from the council, or would you advise us not to do that? Mr. Melendez?